My name is Daniel Whitmore. Some mornings arrive quietly. They don't announce themselves. They don't bring urgency or demand interpretation. They simply open the day and wait. One such morning found me awake before the light, not startled, not restless, but gently alert, as if something within me had already risen and was listening. I lay still for a moment, aware of my breathing, the familiar weight of the blankets, the faint hum of the house settling into its early quiet. I had worked most of my life with my hands and my mind, steady work, practical work, the kind that teaches patience over decades rather than years. I was no stranger to early mornings, yet this felt different. Not important, not dramatic, just complete. There was a calm in my chest that felt earned rather than given. No excitement, no anticipation, just a sense that nothing was missing. My wife noticed before I said a word. "You're awake already," she said softly, her voice still carrying sleep. "Yes," I replied, sitting up slowly. "I slept well. I just don't feel the need to stay there." She smiled, assuming I meant coffee or plans or the long list of ordinary things mornings usually bring. She handed me a mug, warm and familiar, and I wrapped both hands around it. The heat felt grounding. Real. I listened as the house breathed, pipes ticking faintly, the refrigerator humming, the quiet reassurance of a life lived in one place for a long time. There was no rush in me. No sense that the day needed to begin quickly to be worthwhile. As the light outside softened, memories came without effort. Not sharp flashes or emotional scenes. Just faces, conversations, small moments I had once thought unremarkable. Sitting on the porch after long days, bowed heads at quiet dinners, prayers spoken more out of habit than confidence. None of it felt heavy. It felt gathered. I wasn't sad. I felt grateful. As though the important things had already been said, even the ones never spoken aloud. Later, moving slowly through the living room, I stopped near the window without intending to. The world outside looked the same as it always had. Trees standing patiently. A street still empty. Morning unfolding at its own pace. I whispered, almost without realizing it, "Thank you." My wife looked up. "Did you say something?" "Just thinking," I said, smiling. Time felt wide then. Not slow, not fast. Just open. Like it had room to hold everything without pressure. A gentle heaviness settled into my body as I sat down again. Not discomfort. Not weakness. Just stillness arriving carefully, as if it had been waiting for permission. "I think I need to rest for a moment," I said. She didn't question it. She pulled her chair closer and rested her hand over mine. "I'm right here." As my body grew quiet, my awareness did not dim. Sounds softened. The room felt generous, as though it were giving me space rather than receding. My last clear thought before everything shifted was calm and certain. This feels like a doorway, not an ending. There was no fear in that thought. Only trust, built slowly, imperfectly, through years of living, praying without answers and loving without guarantees. And in that quiet, before anything else unfolded, I understood something simple and steady. We are never carried by urgency. We are carried by grace. The stillness did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded the way a deep breath does when you don't realize you've been holding it. My body rested fully, gently, without resistance. Yet my awareness remained clear, organized, attentive, calm. I noticed first what was absent. There was no concern for my body. For decades, I had lived by its signals. Tension, fatigue, small aches that quietly demanded adjustment. Now none of that mattered. Not because it was gone, but because it no longer defined me. "This is strange," I thought without alarm. "I feel more myself than usual." There was no sensation of leaving. No falling away from anything. It felt more like stepping back just enough to see the whole picture for the first time. My thoughts were intact. My memories were present. But everything felt lighter, less crowded. I could still hear the room faintly. The soft sound of my wife's breathing nearby. The familiar creak of the house. Yet my attention was no longer anchored there. Not because it was fading, but because my awareness had widened beyond it. I realized then how much effort I had spent throughout my life simply managing myself, holding things together, staying composed, doing what was expected. Here no effort was required. Awareness did not need my control. It simply existed. A quiet reassurance settled within me. "You're safe. You're aware." I tried to move my hand out of habit, then stopped. There was no need. The stillness held me not like restraint, but like permission. I noticed how patient everything felt. No ticking clock. No unspoken demands. Time was present, but it was no longer asking anything of me. A gentle curiosity replaced all other thoughts. Not the kind that seeks answers quickly, but the kind that listens. I allowed myself to stay with it, noticing how peaceful clarity feels when nothing is being forced. My roles came to mind naturally. Husband, father, provider. A man who had shown up more often than he had understood. Those identities softened, not disappearing but settling into something complete. They no longer felt like obligations I needed to uphold. They felt like chapters already written. I reflected on how often I had confused faith with certainty. How I had sometimes believed harder answers would bring more peace. Yet here, peace arrived without explanations. It rested beneath them. I remembered prayers whispered late at night, some answered in ways I recognized, many not answered at all. I had carried questions for years without resolution, wondering if that meant I lacked faith. Now I understood something quietly but clearly. Faith is not proven by clarity. It is practiced by trust. My thoughts grew quieter not because they were suppressed but because they were no longer competing. There were no arguments forming, no rehearsed worries. Just presence, steady, attentive, and kind. I noticed then that awareness does not age. It does not weaken. It does not rush. It observes, remembers, and learns without urgency. This is what remains, I realized. There was no sense of separation from the world I loved. Instead, there was a deeper connection to it, as though I could hold everything at once without effort. People, moments, joys, mistakes, all gathered without judgment. Listening felt mutual now. Not because I heard words, but because understanding arrived whole, without explanation. It felt like truth remembered rather than information received. Gratitude filled me, quiet, warm, and steady. Gratitude for time lived honestly. For lessons learned slowly. For love that required patience rather than perfection. Nothing asked me to hurry. Nothing asked me to decide. I remained aware, calm, and receptive, allowing this clarity to settle naturally. Not as something extraordinary but as something deeply familiar. And as the stillness deepened, I understood I was not moving away from life. I was being allowed to meet it without noise. The calm deepened without effort. It felt like entering a familiar room where no introduction was needed. I was surprised by how natural it felt, as though I had always known this place but rarely allowed myself to notice it. The space around my awareness was not empty. It felt alive with understanding, gentle, attentive, and steady. I sensed recognition not of my name or history but of my presence itself. There was no review of my life unfolding before me. No weighing of moments. No evaluation. Only acknowledgement. I felt accompanied, though not crowded. Supported, though not guided. The calm itself felt intelligent, as if it understood me completely without needing explanation. I realized then that this space did not exist apart from life. It existed beneath it, always present, rarely noticed. My awareness rested there comfortably, like setting down a heavy coat after a long walk. Silence gathered fully, and yet it was not empty at all. I had known silence before. Quiet rooms, early mornings, long pauses between conversations. But this silence felt different. It felt responsive, as though it was listening as much as I was. I'm not alone here, I thought calmly. Nothing answered with sound, but reassurance filled the space immediately. The silence felt structured, held together carefully rather than absent. I remembered how often, when I was younger, I rushed to fill silence, talking to avoid discomfort, believing noise meant safety. Here, silence felt like safety itself. Thoughts came slowly and finished themselves. There was no interruption, no mental clutter. I realized how heavy my thoughts had been in everyday life without me noticing. How often urgency had disguised itself as importance. This feels like truth without words, I reflected. Memories surfaced gently. Not regrets. Not achievements. But moments of sincerity. Sitting quietly with my children when they were small. Holding my wife's hand without speaking. Choosing patience when pride urged me to defend myself. Those moments glowed softly within the silence. I sensed that wisdom does not announce itself loudly. It waits. There was no pressure to respond, explain, or understand everything at once. The silence allowed understanding to settle naturally, the way dust falls after motion stops. I realized how much of my life had been guided by noise, opinions, expectations, constant motion. This felt like returning to something older and steadier than all of that. You've always known this, the understanding conveyed gently. I stayed there, letting the silence hold me, knowing nothing important would be missed if I didn't hurry. Then from within that silence, light appeared. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It unfolded slowly, like warmth spreading on a cool morning. The light did not demand my attention or overwhelm it. It felt kind. This feels familiar, I thought. The light carried recognition. I did not need to introduce myself. I sensed that I had not arrived late nor early, but exactly when I was meant to. There was no curiosity mixed with judgment, no measuring, no comparison. You are known, the understanding conveyed. What followed was not relief from being evaluated, but relief from having believed evaluation was required. The light did not highlight mistakes or accomplishments. It reflected sincerity, intention, effort, growth that had happened quietly over years. I felt accepted not because I had done everything right, but because perfection had never been the point. This is grace, I realized, not as a concept but as an experience. The light did not pull me closer or urge me forward. It allowed me to remain exactly where I was. I felt seen without exposure, known without vulnerability, supported without instruction. It felt deeply personal, yet not exclusive, something offered freely without being taken away from anyone else. I rested in that light, calm and receptive, trusting that whatever came next would arrive with the same gentleness that had carried everything so far. The recognition came before understanding. It did not arrive as surprise or revelation, but as quiet familiarity. This is Jesus. The thought formed gently, without shock, without fear. There was no instinct to retreat, no urge to kneel, no sense of distance. It felt like meeting someone who had walked beside me for most of my life, often unnoticed, never absent. His presence was not dramatic. It did not press against me or command my attention. It rested there, steady and compassionate, carrying an ease that made explanation unnecessary. I felt respect without tension, reverence without anxiety. You have lived carefully, his presence conveyed, not as praise, not as judgment, but simple acknowledgement. Yes, I replied inwardly. I tried. There was no correction in his awareness. No disappointment. Only understanding shaped by patience. Meaning arrived complete, without sentences, without the possibility of misunderstanding. You carried questions without answers. I felt that immediately. Years of prayer that seemed to return to me unanswered. Doubts I rarely spoke aloud. Faith that matured slowly instead of loudly. None of it had been overlooked. None of it had been wasted. You listened when you did not understand. That mattered more than certainty ever could. Emotion rose within me, not overwhelming, not heavy, but grounding. I realized then that faith had never been about having the right explanations. It had always been about trust practiced over time. And here trust felt complete. There was no need to ask questions. They were already known. Not dismissed, not avoided, simply understood. The comfort I felt was not excitement. It was belonging. Jesus did not guide my attention to scenes or lists. There was no accounting. No comparison. No ranking. Instead, understanding unfolded. This was a full life. Not perfect. Not extraordinary. But complete. I sensed moments where I had chosen patience over pride. Moments where I stayed when leaving would have been easier. Moments where love required cost. Those moments mattered, not because they earned anything but because they revealed who I was becoming. You learned. Yes, I thought slowly. There was warmth in that acknowledgement. I understood then that fulfillment is not measured by achievement or length, but by engagement, being present where you are, with who you are given. Peace settled deeply within me. Not a peace that erased struggle, but one that placed it gently into context. Everything I had lived fit together now, not neatly, not ideally, but honestly. I felt no need to defend my faith, no need to define it precisely. Here, faith was not a statement. It was a relationship carried quietly over years. I rested in that understanding, calm and grateful, trusting that whatever was still to be shown would come gently, just as everything had so far. The awareness shifted gently, like attention being guided rather than interrupted. There were no images placed before me, no numbers written in light. Yet I felt a specific time draw closer to my understanding. February 2026. Not as a warning. Not as a deadline. As a moment. This feels important, I thought, curious rather than uneasy. The understanding that followed was calm and steady. It matters because many will begin noticing themselves more clearly. That surprised me. I had expected something external, events, changes, movement in the world. Instead, what I sensed was inward. Emotional. Quiet. Why February? I wondered. Because winter still invites honesty, the understanding conveyed. People listen differently when the year is no longer new but still unfinished. I reflected on how February had often felt to me over the years, after resolutions had softened, after noise had faded, when intentions either deepened or quietly fell away. This felt similar but more widespread. More personal. I sensed that February 2026 would arrive with a subtle clarity for many. People would wake feeling thoughtful, even if nothing around them appeared different. They would feel something before they could name it. Yes, the understanding confirmed, but they will not rush to explain it. There was no urgency in what I was shown. No fear. No pressure. People would not be pushed. They would be invited inward. That distinction mattered deeply to me. Invitations allow choice. They allow gentleness. The focus moved from time to feeling. I sensed what many people would experience first. Not distress, not panic, but a quiet dissatisfaction. A restlessness that didn't come from things being wrong, but from things no longer fitting the same way. Old routines would feel heavier. Distractions would lose their comfort. I saw people sitting in familiar places, doing familiar things, yet sensing that something essential was missing. They will ask questions, I thought. Yes, came the response, but quietly. Why does this no longer satisfy me? Why do I feel tired even when nothing is wrong? Those questions would not have immediate answers, and that uncertainty would feel uncomfortable at first. Many would want to fix the feeling quickly, to explain it away, distract themselves, stay busy. But this isn't something to fix, the understanding conveyed gently. It is something to listen to. I felt compassion for that discomfort. I knew how tempting it is to avoid stillness when it begins asking honest questions. Yet I sensed clearly that this unease was not a threat. It was a doorway. The awareness deepened. Beliefs people had relied on, not only religious beliefs but assumptions about success, identity and security, would begin to feel less solid. Will this frighten them? I wondered. Only if they cling to certainty instead of truth. That settled within me. Certainty can feel safe even when it no longer fits. Letting go of it can feel risky even when it leads toward freedom. I saw people noticing that answers they once accepted no longer brought peace. Conversations would feel shallow. Explanations incomplete. They will feel ungrounded, I thought. Before they feel regrounded, the understanding corrected softly. This was not collapse. It was recalibration. I recognized this pattern from my own life. Growth had often begun when I lost confidence in what I thought I knew. Humility had made room for something deeper. Not knowing will become more honest than pretending. Relief followed that realization. This was not about being right. It was about being real. Then I sensed the final shift, quiet but strong. A pull towards stillness. People would begin craving fewer words, fewer arguments, fewer demands. Silence would start to feel nourishing instead of awkward. They will slow down, I thought. Yes, because their awareness will need room to catch up. I saw people choosing walks over noise, conversations over distractions, listening over reacting. It would not look dramatic. It would look ordinary. And yet it would change everything. This is not withdrawal, I realized. It is return, came the response. A return to presence, to honesty, to faith practiced quietly rather than spoken loudly. And beneath all of it, steady and unshaken, I sensed the same truth repeating itself, not as instruction, not as command, but as reassurance. Salvation is not found in fear or striving. It rests in clean faith, in prayer spoken honestly, and in love directed toward God without condition. I rested in that understanding, calm and grateful, trusting that whatever followed would unfold with the same patience and care I had been shown. The awareness softened again, like a conversation reaching its natural pause. There was no sense of being dismissed or sent away. Only a gentle completeness, as if everything that needed to be known had already been shared. You have learned what you came to learn, the understanding conveyed. It did not feel final. It felt peaceful. I reflected on my years then, mistakes made honestly, growth that arrived slowly, patience learned through repetition rather than insight. Nothing felt wasted. Nothing felt unfinished. There is nothing more I need to figure out, I wondered quietly. You do not need to carry questions anymore, came the calm reply. You can carry peace. Gratitude settled within me, not emotional or overwhelming, but steady and deep. I sensed that my role now was simple. Rest, trust, presence. Nothing to prove. Nothing to fix. Nothing to explain. The awareness did not rush me. It allowed me to remain there, absorbing that understanding fully. And when the shift back began, it was as gentle as everything else had been. It felt like turning my attention after hearing my name spoken softly from another room. Weight returned first, not heaviness, just presence. Then sound followed, distant at first, then clearer. The familiar room took shape again, the same light, the same quiet morning. Daniel, my wife's voice reached me, careful and close. I'm here, I tried to say. The words came slowly, but they came. My eyes opened. Nothing around me had changed. And yet everything felt different. You scared me, she whispered, holding my hand tightly. I felt calm, I said honestly. I wasn't alone. She searched my face for confusion or fear, but found none. I felt steady, aligned, as if something within me had finally settled into its proper place. When I sat up, every movement felt deliberate. Breathing, listening, being present. I was no longer rushing ahead of myself. Later, when the room grew quiet again, I looked around with new eyes. The furniture, the walls, the window where I had stood that morning. All of it felt familiar, yet newly appreciated. I understood then that what had changed was not the world. It was how I met it. I felt less interested in explanations and more attentive to presence. Less concerned with what came next and more faithful to what was here. Silence no longer asked to be filled. Listening no longer required response. This feels like rest, I thought, not rest from activity but rest from striving. I kept the experience to myself for a while. Not from fear of disbelief, but because it felt complete in its quietness. Some things ask to be lived before they are spoken. Then I noticed something. People around me, family, friends, even strangers, began speaking in similar ways. I don't know why, they said, but I feel reflective lately. Nothing feels wrong. Just different. I feel like I'm being asked to slow down. Each time I heard words like those, something within me recognized them. I did not interrupt. I did not explain. I listened. And in listening, I understood why I had been shown what I was shown. Not to predict, not to warn, but to reassure. One evening, sitting quietly, I remembered the calm I had felt. The patience, the absence of fear. The way understanding arrived without pressure. And I realized something simple and important. Many people do not need answers right now. They need permission. Permission to pause without guilt. Permission to reflect without urgency. Permission to trust that change does not always mean loss. So I chose to share this exactly as I experienced it. No conclusions. No instructions. Just honesty. If someone hears this and feels less alone in their quiet questions, then it has done enough. If someone chooses patience over panic even once, it has served its purpose. If someone allows stillness without fear, then this experience continues its work. I did not share this to change beliefs. I shared it to offer comfort. Because faith does not always arrive loudly. Prayer does not always feel dramatic. Love for God does not need performance. Often salvation rests quietly. In clean faith, in honest prayer, and in love practiced patiently over time. And when awareness arrives softly as it often does, it deserves to be met with gentleness, trust, and calm attention. That is all I ask of you now. Nothing more than presence. After I shared this, I returned to ordinary days. I still woke early. I still worked with my hands. I still prayed quietly, often without words. Nothing outward changed in ways others could measure. There were no signs to point to. No moments that demanded explanation. Yet something subtle had settled into how I moved through the world. I noticed how often people hurry past their own lives. How quickly they fill silence with noise. How rarely they allow God to meet them without structure or performance. I recognized myself in that, not with regret, but with compassion. Faith, I had learned, does not need to be defended loudly to remain strong. Prayer does not need perfect language to be heard. Love for God does not need urgency to be real. What lasts is simpler than we think. It is the willingness to be still. The courage to listen. The humility to trust without needing to control outcomes. I began to notice how often grace appears disguised as quiet. How often God waits patiently beneath our explanations, beneath our certainty, beneath our fear, unchanging, attentive, present. Nothing in what I experienced asked me to withdraw from life. It asked me to enter it more honestly. To meet people without rehearsed responses. To meet God without demands. To meet myself without judgment. If February 2026 brings you a feeling you cannot name, do not rush to silence it. If prayer feels simpler than it used to, do not assume it has become weaker. If faith feels quieter, it may be growing deeper. Salvation does not shout to be heard. It waits to be received. In clean faith. In honest prayer. In love directed toward God, not for reward but for relationship. If you carry that gently, patiently, without fear, you are already closer than you think. And that is enough.